Witty, thought-provoking, and uplifting, Southern Soul Live Stream is a program that you'll invite your friends over to watch every week, where you'll learn about interesting guests and get to share in their fascinating experiences. Tune in each Thursday evening at 8 p.m. Eastern to connect with guests from across the generations and to laugh with our eclectic hosts who are as charming as they are talented. And now, ladies and gentlemen, here's our host, Calvin.
Thank you for that awesome intro and thank you for the cup of coffee. Last week, people, we had an awesome show. You talking about, crickets, you talking about active chat, you talking about people being healed, delivered, and touched. I already know we're going to have a part two on narcissistic abuse and domestic violence. And I think it's going to be sometime in October. But thank you for the feedback. Thank you for the donations. Thank you for the kind words. Because last week's show represented the core of what we do here at Southern Soul, which is we are a community that learns together. So thank you guys. But without any further ado, I would like to tell you about Mrs. Bettye Walker, which is going to be our first spotlight for tonight. But let me tell you a little bit about her. Bettye Walker has more than 3 decades of professional experience in advisory, leadership, and administrative capacities. Her professional background includes legal, office administration, process improvement, corporate governance, employee employer mediation, nonprofit management, and publishing. Y'all already know she's an entrepreneur, and y'all know I love entrepreneurs, right? Miss Bettye, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Awesome, awesome. I am so excited to have you here tonight. And I just love the story of how we connected. Because let me tell you guys, we did a show some time ago, and Miss Bettye submitted feedback, and I kind of checked her out because I always do, check out the people who show up. And I was like, she looks interesting. So I was like, Miss Bettye, we should talk. And Miss Bettye was like, what? I'm not interesting. I'm like, I already know. So Miss Bettye, tell the people something about you. And I just want to say thank you for being here because what we do at Southern Soul is we call hidden gems of the community. So if
Mhm.
you guys know people like Miss Bettye out there who out there doing their thing, but they can be almost a hidden gem of their community, those are the people we're looking for. But Miss Bettye, tell us about you.
Well, one of the things that, first of all, thank you for having me. I appreciate being on this platform and sharing with such like-minded people. This has been such a blessing for me. But you've already introduced a portion of my background as from a education, from a, I guess, professional perspective. Educationally, I have a bachelor's in graphic design. I have a master's in human services counseling. But what I think I'm most proud of at this point in my life is the fact that most recently I've been writing and working on a manuscript surrounding Black trauma. And one of the things that I'm really looking forward to do is to share some of my experiences and stories based on my recognition of some of the trauma that I went through growing up and understanding how that played into the person that I have come to be right now. So that's what I'm hoping that I'll be able to share with your audience today.
Awesome, awesome. And I love a story. We call that origin story, and I love that. But before we get into your story, tell us about your career and your hobbies. What do you do professionally? Because one thing I like that you've done is, you haven't always done what you do now. You've kind of
Right.
evolved from different things. Tell us about, your career progression and some of the things you've done.
Okay. Well, I started out, of course, when I graduated, hopefully at some point I'll share this aspect of my life with you as far as my transition in education from coming from a military background. And then when my dad retired, coming back to the States and being placed in a four-room Black schoolhouse. I come from a generation where my parents both were from two different generations. One from the what they call the Great Generation, which is the World War II generation, and then my mom coming from what they call the Silent Generation. But what was really fascinating for me in the course of me writing about some of my own trauma was that my parents never really talked to me about racism. They never prepared me to transition from a multicultural learning environment and into a four-room Black schoolhouse. So I think, as I shared with you before, part of the challenge I had coming out of school was that I had, when integration happened, because obviously when I went to the four-room school, Black schoolhouse, there was no integration at the time. As you know, I was under the concepts of segregation and Jim Crow laws and all of those things that we had to go through at that time, and not being prepared for that transition. One of the things that I went through was that my parents, or the Black teachers that I had, didn't know how to accelerate my learning beyond what I had already, where I was, and then take me on further. So what they did ultimately was just to keep me back with the rest of the students. Well, as a result of that, I became a slow learner. So from that time until, I would say, the time that I graduated from high school, I didn't have the comprehension level, and I didn't have the insight and the tools to really know what I wanted to do in life. I think the only thing that I thought about was, well, let me go into business. Well, unfortunately, I didn't have the grades in high school to transition. So I wound up going into the one thing that I loved, which was graphic design, or art for me at that time. It was how I interpreted it. So I went into that, and that was sort of my leeway into entering into the publishing business, which is something that I love, and I still do to some extent, still do that now. And then from there, made a transit. I was up in New Jersey, New York area for a good period of my life. Then when I made the transition back to Virginia, which is my home state, I couldn't get back into my field because I came from the mechanical perspective, and everything had transitioned over into computers by that time. I didn't have that skill set. And obviously at that time, people were not willing to train you. They wanted you to come on board with those skills already intact. So from there, I made the transition into admin work, had to start at the bottom of the rung and work my way back up financially, eventually transitioned into legal, which I absolutely love, because I love being able to have some knowledge of how the legal system works. And while at for the last firm that I was at, one of the things that I had an opportunity to do was to serve as a mediator and an advocate between the attorneys and the management and the staff. So what would happen is that when one of the employees, receptionists, secretaries, whatever the case may be, had a problem with one of the attorneys or management, they would come to our group of people. This is a peer elected group. And they would share their concerns, and then we would act as a mediator between them and the employer. That was sort of the open and the segue into me having a desire to really help people and to really get into counseling. And so that in 2013, I made the decision to go back and get my master's. I think I was either in my late 50s or early 60s by that time. So it's kind of late be trying to get a master's. But at any rate, went into counseling, got my degree. It was a one-year program. So I finished that. And then I started my business, which is Bettye Walker Consultants, LLC. And primarily what I do right now is to really focus on what my focus is right now is to really pour back into the Black community. I think Black people as a whole have suffered a tremendous amount of trauma over our lives as a result of many different things that have influenced us. And one of the things that I've observed in my study of that is that we tend to be, as Black people, very benevolent people. We're always helping other people, pouring into other people's visions and dreams, but we don't pour back into ourselves, or we haven't really even learned how to communicate with each other and interact so that we can be a support to each other. So that has sort of now gravitated to where I am in my business, is offering, I want to be able to do some small group counseling with people. I love to do, and I do currently, a lot of one-on-one interactions with people. I like to be able to help people to find their purpose in life and to really launch forth from that. Because I think that each of us are gifted with um, certain gifts, talent, skills that just need to be developed. You know, if you come from a generation like mine where no one poured into you and talked to you about what you could potentially be in life, you go through life not knowing what I can do and what I can be. And you just kind of have to hit and miss, figure it out as you go. And that's really not a good way for us to mature and to progressively move forward in life. You always need somebody that can kind of pour into you. So that's kind of, the short of the long story.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that. I'm tell you what I love about your story is that there's so many themes in there. The themes of it's never too late. The themes of continuing education. The themes of, hey, this is the hand I was dealt, but let me, make the best of it. And I love those nuances, right? And I love how you describe the Black culture when you kind of, I haven't really thought about that before. You said, we're benevolent people,
Yeah.
right? And I love that because if you think about it, it kind of describes this landscape a little bit. So I like that, but let's get into your story a little bit, right?
Mhm.
Earlier you talked about, going from the advanced, schooling to a slow learner. Tell us about
Mhm.
that because this is kind of like your origin story of how you getting started. What was going on during that time when you were in, like you said, one education environment and went to another? Give us a backdrop on that.
Well, again, as I said, part of the challenge, what I think was really interesting for me, I mean, I understand it now. Obviously, as a child, I didn't really make this connection, but to just understand that as a child, you can't really process what's happening to you. You just kind of do it because your parents tell you to do it. And so there was that dynamic of really not being able to have a voice because I didn't know what voice to have as a child. And so I think it's important that adults and parents recognize that it is important for us to be able to be advocates for our children. In my case, my parents didn't have that skill set. I think one of the things I share with you is how generationally, every generation can only give the next generation what has been poured into them. And we spend a lot of times, I think those of us that have matured have come to a place where sometimes we have regrets and we're
Hmm.
kind of bitter towards the things that our parents did not do or they failed us in. And what I've learned for myself is that, you can't really fault the previous generation because they can only give you what they receive. But every generation has a responsibility. And what we do now, we don't work for ourselves. We're not doing any of the things that we're doing because of who we are and what we want. It really is to invest into the next generation, to give them wisdom, to impart to them the mistakes that we've made. So it comes to a point of knowing how to be transparent and honest about what your flaws are, what your shortcomings are, the things that you learn and how you process that, how you got past that. And so for me, the educational piece was just really interesting for me to go back and reflect on. And I have to say that initially, I really didn't think about any of this. It was only as a result of me starting to really revisit the trauma in my life and analyzing it and processing it and praying about it and really letting God show me in the midst of it. And I think the thing that was always really amazing to me is how I'm a person of faith. And so for me, you can go through life with a certain perspective of who you are and what you have to offer, but God can show you your potential that's way far beyond that. And I would say that at this point in my life, I'm really just coming in to the being that I'm supposed to be, where I feel like I can be an asset and I can be a support and a help to other people. But getting back to the educational piece, it was challenging for me because on one hand, I loved being in an all Black environment because that was something I never had.
Hmm.
I had always been in a situation where I was always in a multicultural military type of a school system where I interacted with children from all races and cultures and backgrounds. And so for me, racism and the challenges that Black people were facing in the United States was something that had even entered my mind. I just thought as a child, and we're talking about maybe from 6 to 8 or 9 years old, I just thought this was the way of life for everybody. It never occurred to me that there was differences, based on the color of my skin. And so it was somewhat traumatic for me, coming back to the States and finding out these differences were very prevalent in the United States, and that I was looked at differently. I was treated differently. I can remember one of the interesting things about when I went to the four-room Black schoolhouse is that we didn't have a library. So we had what we call a bookmobile that would come around, and that's how we got our books. We didn't have, like a well, we had a cafeteria, but it was also a pseudo classroom. And so we had things like there would be a truck that come around and sell us penny candy and that type of a thing. And so just the juxtaposition between what I had come from and what I entered into, I had a lot of mixed emotions about it. On one hand, it was so drastically different that I really couldn't really understand what was taking place, but I just kind of went along with it. But on the other hand, I love the interaction with my people, because I was with people who knew me and understood me and looked like me and went through the same changes that I went through outside of, them having not been exposed to the military. And just to really culturally, it for me, my mother's parents were farmers. So they butchered every year and they had a full garden. They had apple trees and apple trees, cherry trees on their property. And just, we used to have this thing where every Thanksgiving, the community would come together and help my grandparents butcher. And, we always have the dinner setting, I think for me was the part that I remembered the most, because there was this formality to it that the men always ate first because they were the ones that had labored all day. And then the children would eat next. And then those of us, the women who had been preparing, food or whatever the case during the course of while they were doing what they needed to do, we would eat last. And there was always this formality to it that I loved, because it was almost like putting some type of structure in place where we engaged each other. And there's always plenty of food. There was always homemade bread and fresh meat and canned or frozen vegetables straight from the garden. There was, my grandparents didn't have to go to the store for anything, except, if they wanted something that maybe was different. But in the community that I lived in a community called Elton, Virginia, and the Black community was called Newtown. And so just that infusion of the Black culture was very enriching for me, because again, it was something I had never been exposed to. And it was wonderful. I remember us driving up, my cousin side driving up, we lived in the Shenandoah Valley and we were surrounded by the Blue Ridge Mountains. We would go up to the mountain and get fresh water that was flowing out of the rocks of the mountain. That's where we got our water from, or people would have a well, and so that's just a little bit of the tidbit of my experiences.
Well, I tell you what I love about your story is that even though we're obviously different generations, so much of your story reminds me of growing up. And a part of your story I love is that when I look at life and look at people, let me get closer to the mic, is that sometimes, a lot of time, we only have one experience, right?
Mhm.
I like the way you tell your story in that, you said your parents were multiple generations, right?
Mhm.
Eras. And then you come about and you had these multiple experiences. You're in this military, multicultural environment and you
Yes.
just living life. You're a kid. And then all of a sudden you come back, your father retires, right?
Mhm.
And now you come back to the domestic world to discover, wow, it's a little different. But as a kid, you still can't digest it. You just know it's very different.
Yes.
It's less multicultural, there's less resources, there's less libraries. And I love that because a lot of times in life, I see people only know one thing. In Atlanta, all they know is Atlanta. I call it Wakanda, right? They think
Hmm.
rest of the world is just like Wakanda. I'm like, no, y'all need to travel, right? But what
Hmm.
I love about your story is that you've experienced these different parts of life. And what I really, really enjoyed is when you said, hey, I haven't always been a writer, but I started writing my story. And as
Hmm.
I started writing my story, these things started being revealed to me, also known as, when we slow down a little bit and start thinking,
Right.
then your story begins to come out. And I just love that process because the process is that I think how you described it, like, hey, this environment may have been less resources. It was all black, but I hear your story and it's like the community, the people, right? The love, the simple things. It seemed like you really enjoyed it. And I'm just telling you what I'm hearing, but I love that about your story.
Yes. Yes. For me, I think that that may, to some degree, have been how I migrated to where I am now, and understanding that to me, Black people do have value. It was so I think I was sharing with you the other night how I was on. I was responding to a post on Facebook, and I was sort of sharing with some of the people on the post. They were the subject or the topic that the person had initially posted about was on reparations, and so I my comment was that I don't think that we will ever live to see the possibility of reparations because America was not willing to acknowledge the atrocities done to Black people, not to mention the fact that they won't apologize for it. And I said, however, for me, my focus now is not so much as what America can do for me, but what can I do for my people? Because our people are suffering. Our people have, but so many of our children, we have not shared our stories. We have not shared how they can overcome certain things. We have not, if you, like I said, if you're in the baby boomer generation like I am, you had to kind of reinvent yourself. There was no opportunity for you to say, okay, this is what I want to do. This is where I want to go. Here are my goals and objectives in life. We didn't have any of that. We had to kind of figure stuff out, make a lot of mistakes in life, and learn from those mistakes. Well, unfortunately, a lot of us, we've gone through the problem issues, but we never recovered from it. And to me, that's where the trauma comes in, is that, first of all, we haven't really come to a place where we can have an honest conversation with ourselves and really go back and reflect and digest and, think about, well, why do I act the way I do? Why do I speak the way I do? How did all of these things, these influences that happened to me, how it caused me to be who I am today? And how do I need to improve so I can be of asset and benefit to somebody else?
Thank you, thank you, thank you. You go to a good point, and I want to kind of, talk about this whole, and I love this phrase because I hadn't heard it in a long time. But it's a two-part question. Part B of the question is, you talk about a lot of part of racism in society you didn't really understand until you turned 60. So that's part B.
Mhm.
But A is this phrase: men talk to boys and women talk to
Mhm.
girls.
Right.
How do you feel that, with this belief or this behavior, that you think your parents may have left you somewhat vulnerable in understanding racism and things that were going on?
Right. Yeah, that was sort of I guess you could say, a perspective that my dad had. And you have to understand that he came from a military background. He also came from a generation who didn't really pour into him. And so he had a very square box perspective of how men relate to women, men, and vice versa. And his perspective was that men are responsible for teaching and training the boys, and women are responsible for teaching and training the girls. Well, one of the things that I write about in my book is how, when my mother died at the age of 41, and I remember there was, to some degree, there was always contention between my dad and I for, mostly just because I was maturing and trying to find my place in life. But I remember sitting down with him and telling him, I said, okay, Dad, I was very close with my mom. I'm going to need your support more than ever. Um, and, just trying to find a medium where we could connect. And that was his response to me. He says, well, I'm sorry, men talk to boys, women talk to girls. And I said, but I don't have a mother anymore. So, this is where you come in. And he says, I'm sorry. So part of that child trauma for me was understanding that at that point, I felt abandoned as a woman, and that the man that I had already always known as my father had somehow disconnected from me because he didn't have the tools in his mind or resources to pour into me, not recognizing that the same things he poured into his son, which is my brother, is what he would have needed to give to me. But he had a very inside the box perspective of things. So, again, part of my trauma was I carried that for many years and had to accept the fact to understand what was his mindset. Why did he didn't do it because he didn't love me or he didn't care about me. It was his perspective based on what he had internalized as a result of his own trauma and his own experiences.
Yes, yes. Thank you for sharing that. And I see in the comments, someone has had a similar experience. As you
Mhm.
know, this is part one of What My Eyes Have Seen, and it's a series that we do based on what I call generational stories. And generational stories is just a form of digital storytelling. One of the key principles we have here at Southern Soul is that if we don't tell our stories, then who will?
Yes, exactly.
Our stories are so, so important because if we don't tell our story, then we repeat the same mistakes. And I'm so, so excited by the fact that you're writing and that you're getting your story out and you're revisiting these things. And even though you're obviously from a different generation that had different principles, you are embracing what works. And I
Mhm.
love that. So tell me this, as we begin to kind of think about next week, and I'm going to ask the same question to Kathy when she comes on, is based on what your eyes have seen, what is your recommendation to the next generation based on what you have seen and what you hope? As you said, it comes a time where you're pouring into the next generation. What
Mhm.
would be your thoughts and recommendations for the next generation? And what I'm going to just summarize all of this is, you know, would you consider that society has improved based on what your eyes have seen? Has society remained the same? Or, what is your advice that you would give based on what your eyes have seen?
Well, I think, as far as society is concerned, to me, things seem to be waxing worse. But I think a large part of that is because we have not, particularly as Black people, given voice to the things that we needed to. We have, in some ways, retreated, to our own corners for whatever reason. But I think it's important that we now begin to speak about what we know, because there have been things that have been deposited in us that is very enriching. And you have to really begin to see your own value as a Black person, what you bring to the table. I have a t-shirt that I purchased from someone that says, I belong on the table, on the call, in the room, and I think that that's the mindset that we have to have. So I would tell the young generation, what is most critical for you to do is to, first of all, respect and honor your past. Okay, because there's wisdom and there's experiences that you can draw from that will help you as you move forward in life. So don't disrespect people and that came before you, as though they don't have any value or anything. As I said, they can only give you what was deposited in them. But I believe that's the way it's supposed to be, because generationally, we should be progressing forward. With each generation, there's new technologies, there's new experiences, there's new things that we can learn and draw from. So draw from that, utilize that. Don't belittle it, bemoan it. Draw from those experiences, take what you've been given, build upon it, and then give that to the next generation that comes after you.
Awesome, awesome. So let's talk about your business and your awesome website. So, what type of services do you provide? Do you, and Tamika's going to drop your website in the chat. Tell us about how people can contact you and what should they look for when they do contact you.
Sure. I would say that principally, my focus right now is, as I said, one-on-one counseling. My title is personal development counselor, um, mental health advocate, and mediator. And those are really the concentrations behind where I am right now in wanting to engage people in one-on-one conversations. I'm also part of community conversations, whether it's in the faith community or just in the general public with other people that I support. But I think it's very important that we engage and that we talk and that we learn that we find a path to being transparent. So a lot of what I do is really to speak into people's lives. My goal is not to question what you want to do, but help you to give you a more holistic perspective of life, and to help you make that next step and transition. Because ultimately, if you find out what your purpose is and which you're gifted at, you will pursue that. And that's the thing that I've learned about me as a writer. I didn't start out with any concept. I didn't have a desire to write. It wasn't in my mind. I hadn't prayed about it. It was just something that God spoke to me about and told me to start doing. And it took for me to write my first book, it was a process of over 17 years, just because
Wow.
there was the struggle between me not wanting to accept the possibility that I could do something I'd never done. And then when I came into it, recognizing that, oh, I'm really good at this,
Wow.
because I have a story to tell.
I love that.
Yeah, so that's primarily what I do. Alternately, I do edit book manuscripts and write content for people. But right now, I'm really more focused on finishing this book. So that's sort of where the writing piece comes in.
Awesome, awesome. And I know you got one book published and another one on the way. I want to read to
Yes.
the audience one of the quotes, and Katie really appreciated this quote. She says, "Did she say this?" I'm like, "Yes." When we did the discovery session, this is her quote. And this is your quote: "Our trauma is more layered, extensive, and intrinsic than any other group of people." And I
Mhm.
believe that to be true. So if you're listening and if you're in this recording, I think if you're looking for someone to just talk through, to, almost like a life coach, almost like somebody to bounce ideas off of, then you want to talk to Miss Bettye Walker because
Mhm.
she's a person that has evolved. She's a person who has taken whatever she was given and made the best of it. They call it lemons to lemonade. So, Miss Bettye, thank you for being here. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
sharing your story. We appreciate you and we see you. If you would hang tight as we transition to our next segment, what we're going to do is Q&A at the end, but if you're in the audience, start typing your question now. If you have questions for Miss Bettye, we're going to pull her back after we chat with Kathy, and then we're going to have, an opportunity to just kind of talk about that. And once again, this is part one of a two-part series. Next week's series is What My Eyes Have Seen, part two, anti-blackness, social justice, policing, and reparations. But this is part one where we want to kind of dig into the history. And we're talking to some boomers tonight. Next week, we're going to be talking to one person who's a millennial and one person who's Generation X. And we're going to have similar conversations, but we're going to cover the generations in this discussion. So, Miss Bettye, thank you. And Kathy, you are on deck. Let's see here. I'm gonna add Kathy. Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
H-
Okay, do I have?
OMG. What do you think? I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, what do you think about
Woo.
Miss Betty's
Yeah,
story?
that's gonna be a hard act to follow.
Oh my goodness. Oh yes, yes.
Wow. So good.
Yes, when I do these segments, what I do is I find the synergies and I kind of look at, what we have in common. And what I enjoy about your story is that your story is an awesome, unique story.
Thank
What
you.
I love about it, as I was telling Miss Betty, because she was so excited, we got on the phone the other day and we must talk for 30 minutes, hour, I don't know how long, but we just kind of talked about it, right? And I let her know. I said, I tell you what these stories have in common. Both of you all have a story to tell, and both of you are from similar generations.
Hmm.
In this part one segment, we're covering a little bit of history and a little bit of what your eyes have seen. And then next week, we're going to come back and see the next generation
Okay.
of what their eyes have seen. And I have a prediction, right, on the inside scoop. There may be some things that ain't changed much over
Mm,
time.
yeah.
So as Miss Betty said, we got to pass this stuff to the next generation
Yeah.
because they say if you don't know your history, then you're doomed to repeat it.
That's
But that's just
true.
a foreshadow for next week. But Kathy, if you don't mind introducing yourself and letting us know who you are, let the people know who you are. Miss Kathy Murray.
Okay. Hi, I'm Kathy Murray. Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. I'm originally from Columbus, Ohio, born and raised, attended the Ohio State University.
The Ohio State.
The Ohio State University. While I was there, yeah, I was always involved with fitness. I was a cheerleader there, was a fitness instructor. From there, I wanted to be something in the medical profession. My mother is a nurse, so I thought, okay, well, maybe I can do something in the medical profession. So, right after college, of course, the way things are, I entered a national aerobic championship. Ended up winning that, traveling all over the country, went to Japan, came back. Then I said, okay, now I'm going to go into my career, use my degree. And so I started in medical sales. Probably, I probably was there in medical sales, maybe 5 years.
Okay.
Yeah, from there, I was like, this is not going to be long term in medical sales. I was always teaching fitness part time, and while I was in medical sales, then I had a really good friend named Madonna Grimes that said, "Hey, we have a opening in Japan. Can you go for a month?" Well, anyone knows when you're in a career, you cannot go anywhere for a month and leave your job. So my manager said, absolutely not. You can't be out of your territory. At that time, I actually transferred to Pittsburgh with my medical sales job. So I said, you have something for 2 weeks, you get that big 2-week vacation. And I said, I can go. I can take the break. And she said, well, I have something in Germany and Italy. Do you want to go? I'm like, yes. Went and did a stint there teaching fitness, and then came back with medical sales. Then from there, an opening came up in Germany. And that's when I said, okay, I don't know I know what I don't want to do. And that was medical sales, but I'll go, I have a job in Europe and I'll figure it out. Ended up, actually, that was a 6-month contract that turned into 5 years. And I was lucky to write a book about my experience.
Awesome. I love people who shift careers because just so you guys know, the first 10 years of my career, one company, right?
Right,
Decade. The second 10 years, 10 companies, right? So 11 companies, right? So
right.
initially, that first shift was like scary. It was like weird, right? But, I came through during a time where the writing was on the wall. They were like, hey, people don't stay at one company anymore. But nobody told you what to do. They just told you times had changed. They didn't tell
Mhm.
you what to do differently. But I was kind of trying to be proactive. I'm like, after 10 years, I'm like, okay, you're going to make a decision. Either you're going to, one, try to sit here for 30 years, which I didn't think that was going to happen, or go out and explore. And I decided to go out and explore. So as I hear your story, I get excited because I know those feelings, those emotions that stepping out on faith that be like, hey, I know what I'm made of. I know I can do it. Right. So I only imagine you
Exactly.
were going through that stuff. Am I getting a little close?
Yes, you were, and I when I got the job to go to Germany, of course, my parents were like, "What are you doing? You don't know the language, you don't know anyone." And I, like I said, took that leap of faith and said, what's the if I could have, should have, would have, I have to do this. If I fail, I always thought, okay, I have the safety net to come back to medical sales. But let me go over and figure it out. And my father was definitely that old school. You stay in the job 20, 25 years, you get your pension, you don't have to like it. That's what you do. It's not about liking your job. You know, my mother was a little bit more supportive. She said, let her go and, you know, she'll figure it out. So yes, it is very scary because I was going to a foreign country.
Wow. Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. I love the way you tell your story because sometimes people think it's easy for you to do
Mhm.
what you do, right? But I
Right.
like the way you describe your parents. I mean, you're like, there was still pensions going on. There was still, a different path. But what I also love is doing that, you're into fitness. You've always been into fitness. You some kind of way managed to follow your passion.
Hmm.
And my belief, right? If people follow their passion, the money, the jobs will come. But I think you may have learned that along the way. I'm gonna guess that. But before we, jump into that, I want to hear about your story because the theme for tonight is what my eyes have seen.
Hmm.
And I know from your story of when you went to Germany, you began to experience and see some things. And we're gonna drop your book. You have an awesome, book that's on Audible that people can listen to. But tell us about when you went to Germany, what you experienced in Germany, and how you end up producing and creating this book. So let's take us to Germany. What happens? How did you
Okay.
get
I got there because one of the studios I had taught actually hired American instructors, and I had been over there as a national aerobic champion when I went over there to teach. So they were like, "Great, you're going to be the next American to come to Germany and teach." They paid well. They definitely. Educators were well paid, even if you're a fitness. What was tough there, the challenge obviously was German. I didn't speak German when I got there. I was, if you want to learn any language, whatever country, you need to live there. You have no choice but to learn the language. So the language was a little difficult, was what really difficult. And just the challenge is cultural because not only did I have to go through a lot of racism, but anti-American.
there?
So I even found some of my white counterparts, were being discriminated because we were American. So it was kind of a double-edged sword there. Um, not being able to get an apartment because you're Black. I remember I had a roommate who was half German that was with me at Ohio State, and she was a journalist, working as a journalist over in Germany. So it was great when I got there because she could help me navigate and, with the language and things like that. So for example, I needed to get an apartment. I was subletting a musician's apartment, but it was time for him to come back. And so this was obviously before the internet. We looked in the paper, called a couple apartments. I wanted something furnished. And I could hear her saying, "Hey, we're going to come over. This apartment's available. Let's go." So she said, "Okay." We get there. And as soon as we get there, and I could hear enough German where she was saying, "Yeah, but just 5 minutes ago, you said it was available and now it's not available." So when I would show up, they were like, "Oh no." And I was American. So then this went on for 2 or 3 times. And she's looking at me like, "I don't get it. We just keep calling. And when we show up, it's not taken. It's just that it's not available anymore." So those are the type of things that I had to go through. I ended up actually getting an apartment. One of my students who was German was an attorney. And she went to the owner of one of the apartments and said, "Okay, I vouched for her. She's going to pay." I mean, I had a visa and everything to work there. And so those were some of the things that were happening when I got to Germany.
Wow. So
Yeah.
before you went, were you like optimistic? Were you aware of racism? Were you thinking like what? Give us the context before you went there.
I didn't even think about the racism. I
Hmm.
just thought this is an opportunity. You don't like what you're doing now. This is an opportunity to follow my passion and do what I wanted to do.
Hmm.
So I don't think I even thought anything about it. I thought this is a new adventure. Um, uh, and it's going to be a great experience for me to be able to live abroad and see other countries. And I had some friends that were already there because they were bringing Americans over for a certification program to certify the Germans, and I went to Italy also. So I don't even think that even was on my radar about racism when I moved to Germany.
Yeah, and thanks for sharing that because now I think about it, based on the job you were doing, right? You were working with, tell us about this Munich Cowboys, American football cheerleaders. Tell us about that because you had a very practical job, right? It's almost
Right.
like race didn't matter. Tell us about the Munich Cowboys
Okay.
and what you did there.
Well, while I was a fitness educator, the manager of the Munich Cowboys, they had an American football league. And we say American because in Europe, when you say football, it's soccer. So you have to distinguish between American football being that it's our game in America. She had heard that I was a cheerleader, and while at Ohio State, I had been on the national championship team where we had won the national championship. One of the students had introduced me, and I came out after class, and she said, "I heard you were a cheerleader," and she just didn't speak any English, so she's just being translated. We have a league here, the girls cheering in English for the Munich Cowboys. It's kind of like probably for us in America, a junior college. And would you come and watch the girls? We need a coach. So I said, okay, well, tell me when practice is and I'll come. Went to practice, all German girls. They don't have a school affiliation. So it was from, I think the youngest was probably 15 and the oldest was 20, 21. So some were in school and some were working jobs. Of course, obviously cheerleading is an American sport. So I watched their practice, they're cheering in English and, doing their football cheers and things. And, I'm thinking they really are terrible. So I'm like, okay, they really need help. I had the time, their practices were in the evening when I wasn't teaching or I arranged my schedule. And I just started working with them for their football. And it was a little challenge because I was learning German, but it wasn't perfect yet. So some of the girls could speak English and translate, and they would say it back to me in German, and then I would, so my ear developed really quick. They could talk to me totally in German, and I understood. So my ear got really good. And then I just kind of had to start from scratch, teaching them the basics, how to stunt, how to jump. They smoked. So that was the number one rule. Okay, first rule, no smoking at practice. No smoking in uniform.
Not just not smoking in life, but not smoking at practice, right?
Okay, we're going to take a break. And so they're lighting up, and I'm just like, oh no, cheerleaders don't smoke. So, they were not in condition. I had to give them a conditioning program to do because in order to be a cheerleader, to hold someone or to throw someone, you have to be strong. So I just kind of took them under my wing. We started with them just with their games, which were in the summer. And then they came to me and said, hey, we have a cheerleading championship here. And I said, okay, let me see. And they showed me the video. And I was like, wow, they were just, they were making it up as it went along. They were showing videos, I was watching like them perform to like Two Live Crew, explicit lyrics. And so I was like,
late
wow.
80s, I'm getting it.
Yeah,
Keep going.
yeah, right. So they were like, no, this is a great song and we're going to dance to it. So just working with them, starting the championship. And then I was the only American coach at that time over there. This was probably early to mid 90s. So American coach, Black, so the championships were a little challenging because as I worked with them, of course, they started getting better. Yeah. And we were kind of head and shoulders above, the other team. So that's kind of how, I should say, go back. The book I have a client that is a New York Times bestseller, Martha Hall Kelly. Okay, you want to ask me?
No, go ahead. No, go ahead. No,
Okay.
go ahead.
So Martha Hall Kelly, she's a client of mine of 10 years, and she writes historical fiction.
Okay.
And so, as a trainer, you have dual roles. You're a trainer and you're a therapist. So she was getting her first novel made, and we talked, a lot about her first novel. But she would always ask me about my time in Munich, and I would tell her, and she would always say, "Hey, that's a really incredible story." So Amazon, the Audible came to her and asked her, "We want you to do an Amazon Audible original." It's a short story called a novella, about 20,000 words. And so I thought, wow, this is great. What are you going to write about? She's like, I want to write about you. And I said, you want to
Wow.
write about me? And she said, yeah, I want to pitch your story and we're going to co-write this book. And so that happened at the end of 2020. And then we started writing last year. And it was just released in February. So that's how the Munich Cowboys Cheerleaders Audible book came about.
Awesome, awesome. I love that story. As they say, fortune favors the prepared. So you're just living your life, right? With a story to tell, you're sharing that story, but then, somebody's appreciating it, which goes back to my point. If we don't tell our stories,
Yes.
then who will? Now, tell me this based on some of the things you said, because, I don't want you to tell the whole book because I want people to download it.
Mm-hmm.
But, give us some of the, I don't know. Let's just go to, my final question. And I asked, Bettye these questions. Based on what your eyes have seen, next week we're going to be talking about anti-blackness, social justice, policing, and reparations. We're going to bring in some speakers who, coach and teach police officers, about, how to relate, to different cultures. We're going to talk about anti-blackness at universities. This
Mm-hmm.
this 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 sentiment where throughout our institutions, there's not just hey, we like black people, we don't like black people. There's a anti-blackness type of behavior going on. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on that is similar but different from what your eyes have seen. So as you
Mm-hmm.
begin to think about, passing that baton to that next generation, what would be some of your thoughts? Would you consider that society has improved, remained the same, gotten worse? But what would be your recommendation for these next generations of people?
Hmm. Um, I think what I would say to them would be, don't be afraid to fail. I think that we are the younger generation, and I talk to nieces and nephews, and I think it's a little. They don't like to step out. No one likes to step out of their comfort zone, and I think that it. My advice would be to, definitely take that go ahead and jump, and the opportunity will come. And that's basically what happened to me. I just said, look, I'm not happy. I'm going to try this out. I started my company there in Germany. I started Fit Bodies. I started initially in the classified, saying, "Hey, American trainer here in Munich," and built my business there. Um, and then I just kind of never looked back. The corporate was a thing of the past, and I was in a Fortune 500 company, so that's why my parents were like, "Okay, now you have the stock options, and you got the car, and and you have the salary, and you have the bonuses. Why are you throwing this away just to pursue fitness?" So again, I always thought that was a safety net. So to come back, I did have something to come back to, but definitely not afraid to fail. Give it a shot. You never know. You never want to think, as I say, if I woulda, coulda, shoulda. And that's what I
Yeah.
thought when I went there. I said, you know what? You're going to have the opportunity to experience different cultures, is what I did. I traveled to different countries. I mean, that's something that you can't learn in school. I mean, that lifelong experience.
Awesome, awesome. I love that because, having that unapologetic, that adventurous spirit, and then going off to Germany and experiencing obviously some things that are, let's just say, weird,
Mm-hmm.
that still there's no regrets. It seems like your experience was still very, um, you know, blessings.
Yeah.
opportunities. And it seems like you probably wouldn't have done anything differently. That,
Yeah.
don't be afraid to fail. And Tamika actually just dropped your website in the chat,
Okay.
Fit Bodies. Tell us about what you do at Fit Bodies. You're located in Atlanta. Do you take new customers or clients? Or tell us,
Oh,
what do you
yes,
guys do at Fit Bodies?
definitely.
Because I know you also are avid cycler. I'm surprised you ain't said that by it. So tell us about you, avid cycler, and Fit
Yes.
Bodies.
Well, Fit Body, again, I started that in Munich when I was there. And I absolutely love what I do because the best job that I have is to improve people's quality of life. That's what I do every day. I love when my clients say, I'm coming off this medication because I've lost weight or I'm healthy or I can now get up off the floor, my 80-year-olds. I can now carry groceries into the car, into the house where I never could do that before. I train triathletes. I'm a triathlete. So I'm a cyclist and a swimmer and a runner.
Wow.
So that's my hobby is triathlons, and I train I have a couple clients that are triathletes, and they're on Team USA, the world team. I'm the strength coach for Atlanta Tri Sisters. I love getting people of color in the sport because when I started in 2000 as a challenge to overcome a fear of open water swimming, I was the only one out there in early 2000s. So now it's so nice to be able to bring people of color into the sport now we have Black Triathletes Association, Atlanta Tri Sisters, we have Black Girls Run, Black Men Run, Black Girls Bike, so it's so nice to be able to pull up more people of color to say, you can do multi-sport or you can do anything. So Fit Bodies, I train all ages, and I'm here in Atlanta. But the blessing if you could say a blessing in COVID, has put me online training. So now I train. I have clients in New York. I have clients in Connecticut. I have DC. So I'm able to branch out of Atlanta online and train people as well.
Wow. Tell us about that. I didn't know you did, training virtually. So how does that work? Do they connect with you on your website? Do they hit you up on IG? How does that work?
Well, I either do Zoom or we do, FaceTime or Google Duo or what have you. When 2020 hit and we had to go online, obviously with this pandemic, we had to be healthy. So I instructed them on what to equipment to do at home. It doesn't take much, some bands, some ball. You don't have to have a lot of weight equipment because you do body weight. So I started strictly training online, and then a lot of my clients were in Jersey that had moved said, "Great, I haven't found a trainer here. I can now work with you." So we just work just like I'm talking to you. Hey, pick up the ball and pick up these weights and do this exercise. So I am online, which actually was a blessing because it really helped me last year when I was writing and editing the book.
The creativity has sparked. So you guys heard it here first. I will be asking Kathy Murray back to Southern Soul because I've been trying to catch these yoga instructor and all of these other people. I'm like, I need to surprise the people at Southern Soul with some physical activity. I'm always trying to
Mm-hmm.
get brand new and create something new. But now that I know, Kathy,
Yep,
that
I
you
can be
already
anywhere.
doing it, I now know where to find you. This has been awesome. I'm going to bring back Miss Bettye for some Q&A. And Tamika and Kathy, for the audience, this would be a great opportunity to ask questions directly to the speakers. And while we're waiting on questions, Miss Bettye, you still there?
Yes,
We'll
I'm.
get you unmuted. Awesome. What you think about Kathy's story?
Yeah, I particularly enjoyed well, there were two things I liked about her story. The first of all, having the courage to launch out into something that she was passionate about that maybe nobody else supported. That's key because I think that's a lot of our struggles. Um, and the fact that there is success on the other end of that is just encouraging because I think a lot of us are just fearful to launch out into the deep. So that was one piece. But I also really I would like to connect with you because part of the struggles that I have having, I'm in my late 60s now, is trying to, get some type of exercise program. Everything has changed physically for me. And although my diet is not that bad, I think the part I'm challenged with the most is the exercise. Because it's like, I could do something and then I need like at least an hour nap to kind of recover. And that's just not a good way to live.
Right, exactly.
I want to call it Operation
overweight.
Biceps. Can we see some biceps, Katie?
Yeah.
Look at those biceps. It's crazy, right? Why are her biceps? I'm kind of like a little feeling some kind of way, Kathy. How you gonna come on my show and just flex your biceps? Okay, I stop. Okay, Katie, we got to catch up with Kathy, because Kathy doing her thing. I ain't gonna be swimming and running no bike in the water and stuff. But I'm just saying, how do we get our biceps better, Kathy? Any recommendation for the audience on how to get the biceps, looking like Anime Bullock from What's Love Got to Do with It?
Yeah, right.
Well, it's one of those, it's that saying where, use it or lose it.
Oh,
If you don't use it, you're not going to, have any type of, just muscle, just strength is important to do everything, everyday functional strength. I mean, I work with my 70, 80-year-olds just for balance and things that they're just doing around the house.
wow.
So it's not all about, of course, everyone wants to look a certain way, but, I concentrate on the functional strength of what are you going to be able to pick up your grandkid? Are you going to be able to get up off the couch? Are you going to be able to balance or not fall? If you're going to get on the floor, are you going to be able to get up? So just things like that we have to have every day that we don't think about, especially as we get older.
Yes. Lose it, use it or lose it. I hadn't
Use
thought
it or
about that
lose
when
it.
it comes to muscle and density, but that's what they say about, men and people. I guess if you don't use your muscles, you will lose it. Katie, seems like you're thinking, what question you got for the speakers?
I'm thinking so much. I honestly really loved Miss Betty's question, and it was about fitness, right, and wellness. And Kathy started talking about functional fitness, and I do think as you talked about bringing Kathy back on the show, I do think it's important, and we'd love to hear more from you, Kathy, in terms of if you think about decade by decade, sort of. Yeah. What are the kind of things that we should be mindful of when it comes to fitness and when it comes to functional fitness? What are the simple things that we can do day to day?
Well, when people always ask me, where do I start? The biggest thing I tell people to do is walk. Walking is free. You start moving. That's the biggest thing. I mean, you can walk around your neighborhood. I mean, make sure it's safe, but, just walk. That's free. And then, then they say, well, okay, where can I start with strength training? Well, just, like a squat. A squat is basically sitting down in your chair and standing up. So when my clients complain about, I hate these, it's like when you lose that ability to get up out of the chair and you have to have somebody help you, you're in assisted living. So let's do the squats.
You know how to motivate people. Good Lord, don't she pay the picture, Katie? She like, all right.
That got real.
She like, you keep playing if you want to. She said, what she say? Mess around and found out. That's what she say.
Yeah. Well, it's true. I mean, you want to be able to live independently.
Right.
And, so my older clients with, fall prevention and balance and just being able to get up. I had my 80-year-old the other day said, my friend, I had to help her off the couch. She just pops up. But I started working with her like in her 70s, so it's never too late to start. But you have to start somewhere, and, having someone to help with your form and not jumping into things like Bettye, you were saying, okay, I'm tired. There's a gradual progression that you have to do where you're not just, putting it all out there and then having nothing left, So there's a way to do it.
There is a way to do it. Do we have any questions for either of our speakers? Thank you, Tamika, for putting the websites and the Facebook and everything else in the chat. We cannot be this quiet.
Yeah,
I just want to say also, because Miss Bettye was talking about writing, I have to tell you that I had written a fitness book first. I had to have a hip replacement 5 years ago. So I wanted to do a fitness book on how to come back from a hip replacement. And I'm shopping it and everybody's saying no. And then I got the Audible deal. So you just never know where God says, okay, well, that was cute and all to start with, but this is the book that you're going to start with, which is the Munich Cowboy Cheerleader. So you just never know that path. As I say, with the GPS, you can go on another path and it'll recalculate and you're still getting to the same goal. So
that's right. That's right.
You
Miss
know,
Bettye, I'm sorry.
go ahead, Katie.
Miss Bettye, you talked about going back to school. I think you said late 50s, early 60s, if I'm not mistaken. You know, that's a heck of a step to take. And I'm curious, you know, what were sort of some of your fears and how did you get beyond that hesitation that so many of us have when we're doing something and we feel like we're a little bit, I want to say out of order or late or slow or whatever in doing it. How did you overcome that?
I think for me, it was really more a matter, not so much overcoming, but recognizing that I had finally found something that I really wanted to do. And I needed in my opinion, I needed the educational component to go with it to give me credence for, me establishing my business and, on paper. And so I think that one of the challenges that I found out is that mentally you don't connect the dots as quickly when you get older. So that was kind of challenging, but I think one of the things that helped me was that I wasn't in a long tier program. It was just I went to graduated from Region, and so they had developed a human services program as an offshoot to their psychology and counseling department, and they had set it up for 1 year, which worked out perfectly for me because it was like I'm just not ready for 3-4 years at this point. And I was doing it online. Online is a whole different beast from being in person. And just the reading material and taking quizzes. I'm at a point in my life where that's just rough for me right now. Not because I don't mentally process things, but just I think I don't have the patience levels to take tests anymore. It's like not something that I want to do anymore. So that was kind of what my process was.
Kitty, what I love about what she said is that it was a couple things, right? Is that, we all have these challenges, right? These fears, these phobias, right? But what she really mentioned is she said she figured out what she really liked. I like that, right? And then I call that passion, right? She figured out what she's passionate about. And then she got real practical. She like, look here, I ain't doing this for 4 or 5 years. You know what I mean? Give me what you got, right? So, but she stayed practical, right? She didn't get all out of control. You didn't hear her say she want to go get a PhD in chemistry. That's not what she said. She said, I figured out what I liked, and I let that get me through there, and I got a good program. So I appreciate that. Well, this has been an awesome segment, and I appreciate both of you for sharing your stories of letting us know what your eyes have seen. And this is the segment where I begin to let people know what to expect for next week. And this is the first time we've done this, actually, it's not the first time. We've done it differently. We started last year doing what our eyes have seen, and it began to kind of just talk about, and Katie, I think you created that because you were talking about your dad and, some of the conversations you have with your dad. And, and the conversation would always have a theme. And the theme would what my eyes have seen. And I think your dad just turned 80 last week, right?
Right.
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 So, and I love that because what it does is it gives us an opportunity to, as Miss Bettye says, to really, really begin to listen, right? And respect. And as we talk about this, we often talk about Southern Soul as a way to connect the generations and to really do that. But then, the how. But, I love this segment of what your eyes have seen because we really need to listen to that in an environment of sometimes when we don't hear those stories, then we begin to repeat those stories or not begin to benefit from those stories. And there's so much value there. But those are just my thoughts. I'm just excited about it.
No, I hear you. And I think the other part of that is, when we post people's contact information and websites and stuff like that, I really want to encourage people to go and take a look, right? And to keep on learning, to keep asking the questions. It's just, and I say that to myself as much as everybody else, right? Because I think there's so many good things, good people that you bring to us. And it's really important for us to get all we can from them. We gotta learn.
I love the phrase that was given to us. We call them the hidden gems of the community. So if you guys are listening and you know of any hidden gems of the community, definitely let us know, because we're often trying to give them the spotlight. Because I remember when I was doing web design, Katie, finding those initial customers or getting started, it was hard, right? And you're just trying, like Miss Bettye said, we're trying to help other people. But if you're trying to help other people, it shouldn't be hard to help other people, right? So that's one thing we do here at Southern Soul. We're not about selling. We're not about, hard, whatever. We're about helping. We're about community. So I'm going to play some of my favorite songs. And, I'm going to try not to hit any KD's ratchet music.
Thank you for joining us at Southern Soul Livestream Talk Show. Join us weekly at soullivestream.com. If you're joining us live, we'll take a quick music break and then come back for a discussion with the audience.